Is the Fed put back on? Let's talk about it. So recently we got CPI prints that came out this past Wednesday that showed that inflation is definitely coming down, right? So we had headline CPI and then we also had core CPI that came out. So CPI essentially measures the differences between prices and goods that we pay on a day-to-day basis, essentially that are wrapped into the everyday cost of living. So what does CPI stand for? Well, CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. Now, Consumer Price Index essentially measures inflation, or the things that we purchase on a day-to-day basis that's wrapped up into our daily cost of living. Now, what makes up CPI? Well, there are several factors that go into this basket that is considered CPI. You have food and beverages. Now, food is essentially the price that you're willing to pay at the grocery store, and when you go out to eat at restaurants, what are you essentially paying now for the products and the goods and services they bring out to you? You have housing that also factors into this, such as shelter, rent, owning a home. You also have utilities that goes into this. Is the price of utilities going up or down? You have apparel, so such as your clothing, transportation, what you're willing to pay for a vehicle, used or new, cars and trucks. You have maintenance that go into it. You also have public transportation such as airfare, trains, buses. You have medical care, which is wrapped up into medical services such as doctor visits, hospital visits, and you have recreation such as sports, movies. You have recreational goods such as computer goods, TVs, pets, and then you have educational services, and this pretty much entails what you pay for higher education, what does it cost for you to do tuition and fees. And then you have other goods and services such as you going to the barbershop, the beauty shop. Now all these are weighted into the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, and based off of the relevance they have on our lives on a day-to-day basis. Now let's talk about the differences between headline CPI and core CPI. Now, headline CPI factors in all the categories such as food and energy are encompassed into this. The Fed does not like this. The reason being is because food and energy are very volatile. Now, you may be asking, how are they volatile? Well, food and energy are subjected to certain events. They may offset or increase or decrease the prices of food and oil. So events such as in the food category, you have famine, you can possibly experience natural disasters. You can also experience like influenza, different like bird and cow diseases that may impact as far as the supply chain and how we have accessibility to those type of foods. You also have oil or energy, which are subjected to war, human patterns, and you also have as far as if a natural disaster hits an oil refinery. These things can impact the prices that we're willing to pay for these services or these goods. Now, the Fed chooses to use core CPI because food and energy are so volatile. So thus, this affects how they view inflation. So they rather choose core CPI over headline CPI. Now, the Fed has been very steadfast about getting to their 2% target with inflation. Now, with interest rates recently going up, this is to combat that inflation has gotten roughly to 9 to 10% during 2022, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Now, the Fed has been able to bring down inflation with the interest rates being at 5.25%, bringing them from 9% roughly down to 3.4% due to the fact that interest rates have been eating at inflation and people's purchasing power. Now, we saw these last few quarters that inflation hasn't been budging, roughly staying at 3.4% and still climbing due to the fact that inflation has been stubborn. Now, inflation has been stated due to the fact that consumers are still steadfast when it comes to spending. They've been reaching into credit card debt in order to maintain the certain lifestyle that they have, despite the fact that inflation has still been sticky. But due to the fact that wage growth has been decreasing and job losses have been increasing, we're starting to see that consumer spending is starting to cut back quite a bit. Now, homes have still been pretty high due to the fact that sellers aren't willing to budge off of top dollar prices, which is contributing to higher inflation too, because most sellers understand that if they part ways with their homes, they're going to walk into these higher mortgage rates when it comes down to them purchasing newer homes. So they're not budging off these top dollars, which is contributing to these inflationary effects. But as we're starting to see in the CPI print that inflation is coming down, it's showing that the economy is softening due to the fact that consumers are not willing to spend top dollar on these vehicles, top dollars on these homes, and they're not willing to go out and spend as much money as they were before because money is not as cheap as they were getting before. Now, consumer spending makes up roughly 70% of the US GDP, and we're starting to see that consumers are losing steam when it comes down to purchasing and spending money. But does this mean that the Fed may cut rates or the Fed put us back on? Well, many speculate by 2024 September that the Fed will begin to cut interest rates. Here's the thing though. The Fed is in fear that if they cut rates too soon, we're going to see a spike in inflation. But Chairman Jerome Powell has been very vocal how he wants to keep interest rates higher for longer because he does not want to see inflation come back. Well, if we cut interest rates anytime soon, what does this mean for the stock market? Well, the stock market is probably going to make all new time highs. And for the housing market, this means that pretty much it's going to be more competitive to buy a home again, because if the Fed cuts rates, this means that more money is back into consumers' pockets. So what do you think? Should Jerome Powell raise interest rates, or should he keep interest rates where they are, or should he begin to cut them? You let me know what you think in the comments. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share.